The segregation era started around 1849 until about the late 1950s, where blacks and whites were separate but not equal. They were segregated through public transportation, whereas it was mandatory for blacks to sit in the back and whites sat in the front of the buses. We were defined as colored or Negro because of our skin color, and of course, the Jim Crow law. This law was a law that mandated segregation in restaurants where we couldn't eat together, theaters where we couldn't watch movies together, bars where we couldn't enjoy each other's company together, and water fountains where we couldn't drink after one another, and even schools, separate education. During the time of the Jim Crow law, a black man flirting with or even marrying a white woman was an immediate arrest. However, with the Till's lynching or Till's death, it was different for him. Emmett Till, a young boy from Chicago born July 25, 1941, to a mother named Mommy Till. During his arrival by the late 1940s, Chicago was rapidly losing its white population, and blacks were rapidly moving in, specifically in the west side neighborhood of Lawndale, which explains Emmett Till mind of freedom back then. Emmett Till, only 14 years old, in 1955, on his way to visit his cousins in Money, Mississippi, as Mississippi being the heart of Jim Crow laws. On August 24, 1955, as Till entered the Bryant's grocery store to purchase a piece of bubble gum. As Till was exiting the store, reports stated he whistled at the white cashier, Carolyn Bryant. Carolyn rushed out the store to get her gum, but Till escaped with his uncle Moses Wright. 3 days later, Roy Bryant, her husband, and J.W. Milam, her brother-in-law, went to search for him, and when Till was found, he was kidnapped and threw on the back of their truck. A couple of weeks later, Till's body was found in the Tallahatchie River, weighed down by a 150-pound weight.
Emmett's murder was front-page news. His body was taken to a funeral home owned by A.A. Rayner, who had promised Mississippi authorities that he would keep the casket nailed shut. When Mamie Till asked him to open it up, Rayner refused.
I think everybody needed to know what had happened to Emmett Till.
Here is the church that Emmett Till funeral took place. It took place on 4021 South State Street. The name of the church is Robert Temple Church in God in Christ. This church was built in 1923 and remodeled in 1943 by Elder Zeddy Hill. Here is the Chicago landmark from Richard M. Daley, designated on March 26, 2006. Stated this church building was the location in early September 1955 of the open casket visitation and funeral for Emmett Till, an African-American teenager from Chicago who was murdered while visiting relatives in Mississippi. His brutal, racially motivated killing was a catalytic moment in the modern civil rights movement, drawing thousands of mourners to the visitation and funeral and horrifying countless others who saw photographs in his badly mutilated body in African-American publications such as Jet magazine. So, this was made to memorialize Emmett Till, a Chicago landmark. There were over 50,000 people here during his funeral. Mommy decided to have an open casket funeral. She urged not only she should see what has happened to her son, but for the whole world should see the darkest shadow of America during 1950s. Lonnie Bunch says in order to come to the grips with this tragedy, she saw Emmett as being crucified on the cross of racial injustice. Having this open casket funeral helped galvanize the civil rights movement, mobilizing activists to fight for civil rights all around the country. Putting her son's tragic death and spotlight generated a whole new era for the black community. Miami Till, becoming an activist herself, gathering large crowds together in Chicago protesting for racial equality. Medgar Evers, he was involved in the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, a civil rights organization. This drove Evers into training for activism, boycotting segregation. His powerful mindset drew crowds of people to support him, especially the colored. He now was the main focus for the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. After people finding out his public investigations on Till's case, he became the target of many against racial equality and desegregation. He had a goal to desegregate the school he attended to. As stated, a case aided by the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in the case of Brown v. Board of Education 347 U.S. 483 that segregation was unconstitutional. Evers' actions was good until there was people who wanted to put him to a stop. June 12, 1963, he was assassinated carrying shirts stating "Jim Crow must go" in his own driveway, shot in the back. Its legacy is still kept alive. A college in New York City, an immortalized statue in Jackson, and a television movie. Also in our very own city, Medgar Evers Elementary School, located on 9811 South Wallace Street, carrying on the legacy of education.
Medgar Evers' death served as a rallying cry for the movement. 2 months later, on August 28, 1963, a crowd of 250,000 gathered for a historic march in Washington. It was the largest demonstration for human rights that America had ever seen. Black and white, Jew, Protestant, and Catholic had come together with the hope that equality, liberty, and justice would prevail for everyone.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. King was a social and civil rights activist and a Baptist minister. Dr. King led the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott and fought for racial equality. This was a turning point for the civil rights movement era. Dr. Martin Luther King often visited Chicago to build support for the Black freedom struggle. One summer in Chicago during 1965, King ideas changed Chicago because Chicago was a segregated city.
Now is the time to get rid of the slums and ghettos of Chicago. Now is the time to make justice a reality all over this nation. Now is the time.
Dr. King was on his way to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to fight against School Superintendent Benjamin Willis in Chicago's segregated public schools. The next goal Dr. King had was to end the slums in the city of Chicago. This was known as the Chicago's Freedom Movement, making new homes for the minority class, blacks. With Dr. King's marchings in Chicago led to ending the legal segregation of African American citizens, equal education for both whites and blacks. Schools like King College Prep and even a main street named King Drive on the south side of Chicago was a way to commemorate Dr. King. The creation of the Civil Rights Act happened in 1964, following the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Dr. King received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, and King was assassinated in April 1968.
That one day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Today, Chicago still faces racial injustice with cases like Cedric Chapman in 2013 and more recent Laquan McDonald. Maybe we should all take a look back on the lynching of Till becoming so inspiring to give us freedom by many of civil rights activists, and the freedom that both of us, blacks and whites, are abusing today.